Hi, welcome to Blogging Hits TV. You're watching Culturally Determined, and I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade. And my guest today is Katy Waldman. Katy, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Katy Waldman. I'm a staff writer at Slate.
Thanks for coming back on. You've written some pieces in the past couple weeks that kind of apply a literary critic's sensibility to things that are happening in the news and some of the crazy personalities that we're seeing right now. You recently published a piece on the human enigma known as Donald Trump Jr.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you discovered about Donald Trump by looking closely at his social media feeds?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a crazy assignment in that obviously I didn't have access to him. And so I was sort of looking at his presentation via social media, which is a pretty contradictory presentation, actually. On one hand, he's sort of trying to be this golden family man, surrounded by his children and in the outdoors. On the other hand, he's really bilious and confrontational and provocative, and he is sort of attacking his father's enemies and picking fights. So there's kind of a tug of war there. And I think that when you look at his aggression in the light of the way he fits into his dad's family, sort of how he's spurned and he's not really, he doesn't get a lot of his dad's love. And if you look back through profiles, you see anecdotes that show just how sort of marginal he's always seemed to his father. You can see how the aggression that he now unleashes on social media could be, a sublimation or some kind of manifestation of all of that familial disappointment. So, I mean, all of this is a lot of interpretation and speculation, but it's fun and they're public figures, and I think he sort of opens himself up to that too.
Yeah, I think it's like the only recourse we have in this hellscape of contemporary news is like analyzing these strange people who have like way more control over our lives than they ever should. Um,
Right.
so you know that maybe the okay. So I used to probably go along with everyone else thinking that like Eric Trump was the stupid one, and that's kind of the popular perception on like SNL. He's portrayed as like someone who can't even talk really, and I realized that was I was being prejudiced because he just looks stupider. But
Hmm.
Donald Trump Jr. is the one who like gets into all these like Eric Trump is smart enough to kind of keep his head down and stay off the national stage and not schedule meetings with Russian agents.
Well,
And
I think it's like, yeah, it's a part of the firstborn conundrum, right? Like, I think the Trumps have so little imagination that they just think, oh, well, the first child, the eldest son, is clearly going to like be dabbling in the family business. And so this person who is probably equally dumb as Eric Trump is thrown into contexts that Eric Trump doesn't have to deal with. I don't know. That's like my completely unsubstantiated theory. They're both dumb. But yeah, it is true that he has had ample opportunity to prove his lack of confidence in these delicate situations.
so one very Trumpian fact that you pull out is that Donald Trump, the elder, did not want to name his son Don Jr. because what if it turns out that he's a loser?
Hmm.
Which is just so perfectly Trumpian. But you also have that you note that Don Jr. dressed up as his father for Halloween,
Yeah.
which is creepy. And then he got into this other alternate Halloween-related political Twitter imbroglio because he made a joke about like taking away his daughter's candy, and this would be your first experience with liberal taxation or something like that.
Yeah. Socialism, socialism.
Right. Um, yeah, I mean, and Donald Trump Jr. seems to have gotten him like he seems to have gotten himself into trouble. He was he testified. I think I can't remember if it was the House or the Senate Intelligence Committee for 10 hours behind closed doors, and apparently he invoked attorney-client privilege for conversations with his father that where attorneys were present, which is it seems like someone said that the Sopranos they use the same tactic about claiming privileged conversation just if a lawyer happened to be there. I mean, do you have any predictions about where the saga of Don Jr. is going?
Uh, I wish. I don't think it's going anywhere good, but I mean, it seems like this is a blundering uh, machine. I, I couldn't speculate about how involved Don Jr. is in the Russia thing, but it does look good, certainly.
Yeah, and kind of my take on the Russia story is like these people seem too stupid to be involved in an international conspiracy, and like, but then you also hear that the Kremlin likes to cultivate people who maybe think they're savvy, but they're not actually savvy.
Hmm.
But it does. I don't know. I'm still thinking that like the grand international conspiracy that some people are hoping for just they never could have pulled it off, and it's more just like bumbling around, which seems to be one of Don Jr.'s like inherent traits.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about his hunting?
Oh gosh, I mean, to me in my East Coast liberal bubble, I think it's kind of gross. Like, why kill animals for fun when you don't need to eat them? But I think, like, in his particular sort of like set of symbols or like symbols around him, it stands in for manhood. And he wants to show that he is a real man who can, hunt the beasts in the forest. And oftentimes he'll like post an Instagram photo of himself in camouflage next to like a dead creature. And I think it's like part of his sort of like dick swinging persona. Um,
Right, and there's also these photos of him doing big game hunting and holding a severed elephant's tail. And
yeah,
there was this story, or a the Trump administration briefly considered lifting the ban on bringing elephant trophies from I think Zimbabwe and Zaire maybe, and this was people were joking this was like the elders like present to Don Jr., but then they caught a lot of backlash for it and briefly rescinded that. I mean, what's weird is that Donald Trump Jr. is an East Coast elitist. Like
yeah.
he grew up in Manhattan, but he is becoming like a red state emblem, like his father.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point that there might be something strategic in this posture, like, closer to the earth and able to understand the needs of people who don't live in Manhattan high rises. But it also seems like even when he was in college and before college, he would go on these sort of outdoorsy nature trips with his grandfather. And that was a little bit a function of being alienated from his parents. So maybe, to be fair to Don Jr., maybe nature has always been kind of a consolation and a sanctuary for him.
Yeah, and there's you discussed this photo that ran with a profile of him in the Times of him sitting on a stump in the woods in like a lumberjack shirt and looking
Yeah.
very forlorn. And yeah, it implied that there were unplumbed depths to Don Jr. that maybe aren't there. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it is funny that his family sort of tags him as the melancholic, thoughtful, introspective one. You know, I guess I guess the bar is low in
Right.
that family, maybe, but
So why don't we move to your piece that you put up just within the past day or so? The Billy Bush redemption tour is confusing. What drew you to talking about this weird figure of Billy Bush?
I think that there was just a lot of ambient uncertainty about how to process his comeback. And I think part of it has to do with like we don't exactly have a script for him. We have a script for the courageous accuser who comes forward finally to break the silence, and we have a script for the contrite, harasser who says, "I didn't realize," or "I should have known," or and people have absolutely and I think justifiably come down on a lot of these apologies as inappropriate or not doing what they were designed to do. But at least we sort of have a general shape of what those comments are supposed to look like in our heads. And with Billy Bush, he just kind of straddles all of these different roles, like he, in one respect, was an enabler and an abetter and someone who symbolized an entire culture of complicity. But on the other hand, he was a scapegoat and he lost his job. He lost a lot. and the person who actually did much more wrong became the president. And so, like, that activates our feelings of injustice. And he was also subject to power dynamics that are absolutely not identical to, but do sort of resemble the power dynamics that Trump was able to exploit when he was dealing with less established young women. And so I think it's just hard to know how to feel about Billy Bush and how much of our sympathy we owe him. And as I was watching him talk to Stephen Colbert and watching people respond to his op-ed on Twitter, I noticed that people seemed a little bit wary and confused about how to talk about this.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a sense that he, like, I mean, what if he were acting with good moral character? Like, what should he have done? Like, he kind of, or in the moment when the Access Hollywood tape was filmed, it's hard to like call people out for saying something offensive when you're in a casual setting. Like, probably lots of people have some kind of experience with, like, you're at a party and someone says something that's a little offensive, and you're like, should I ruin the mood by calling this person out with an epic clapback, as the internet calls it, or should I just kind of keep my mouth shut and we'll talk about it later? And maybe not see that person again. So, like, he's the innocent bystander, but is somehow morally implicated in this act. And then the fact that he was the only one who was actually punished for it by losing his, weirdo, like, I think you call him a goofus at one point. He has this weird Ryan Seacrest like job he fulfilled as hosting fat bit TV shows does seem very unjust, and the person who committed, as you noted, the person who committed the offense is now the most powerful person in the world.
Right.
Do you think we should let him back into our good graces?
I mean, I think that is sort of flicking at much broader questions that we've all been thinking about recently, about restorative justice and rehabilitation and redemption. And do you sort of scrub someone out of society because they do something wrong? And I mean, I would like to think that we can welcome a reformed Billy Bush back into the fold. I certainly don't think that his offenses rise anywhere near the level of a lot of the men that we're talking about now. And so, like, welcome back, Billy Bush. There were some sort of unsavory aspects of his comeback where he seemed to be feeling entitled to a lot of pity, and he was kind of wallowing in his own victim status and sort of painting himself as an object of persecution when, he didn't have to egg Trump on. I mean, maybe he did because of the demands of being a lackey at NBC. But, he didn't do it perfectly. But yeah, I mean, I think we should, if he has truly had a change of heart, those are the allies of the future, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And certainly compared to his cousin, are they like first cousin, second cousin, George W. Bush, who has also been reaccepted into polite society in some ways, when we consider their, George W. Bush didn't have to go away for a year after his presidency was over. He just,
Yeah, and that seems a little queasy too. I don't know how. I mean, a lot of people died in the Iraq War. Like, that's pretty unforgivable.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess this is a natural segue to another piece you've written recently, which was about the public apology in the post-Weinstein era. And you wrote particularly about Louis C.K.'s apology and what that did and didn't do. So what... I mean, Billy Bush has had a kind of apology. Some of these people, like CK, released problematic apologies that had some good and bad aspects. Weinstein himself released a totally ridiculous non-apology apology saying he was going to fight the NRA with renewed passion now, and then as more and more came out, he's been, totally silenced.
Right.
So is it possible to apologize, to have a good apology when you've committed a string of sexual harassment offenses like multiple powerful men are accused of doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the problem, is that an apology is a useful social tool that only like fulfills its function, that only works under particular conditions. And one of the conditions is that people need to be on some level ready to forgive you. And I think that the problem with Louis C.K.'s apology ultimately, I mean, one problem with it is that he's so skilled. Like, he's built an entire career on sort of exposing his own shame and flagellating himself for doing wrong. And so, him doing it again, it's hard to separate what's genuine and from what's artificial.
Mhm.
But I think like the broader problem is people weren't ready to like embrace him yet. And so there was not really anything that he could say that would um, that would acknowledge the self-interest inherent in an apology, but also overcome that. Because an apology, of course, is self-interested, and you have to be willing to say, listen, I know that you're doing this because you want to be reintegrated into society, and we will accept that.
Right. I think I think like the problem of forgiveness is a huge one, and there's no societal way to deal with forgiveness. And you have people who harmed women for many years and received no punishment at all. And
Right.
do they get should we like excommunicate them from society? Like Louis C.K. had this movie that's about to come out, and
Yeah.
that was canceled. I believe his HBO stand-up specials were removed from the platform. So it's like, and something similar happened with this movie that Kevin Spacey was set to star in. His role was refilmed at the last minute by Christopher Plummer. So, and this is people have compared this to like the photographs from Stalin era Russia, where people were erased from the photograph once they stopped towing the party line. I'm troubled by that kind of just like cut out the cancer, like erase everything kind of instinct that we have, like kick the person out, but then like what is the appropriate punishment? So
Well,
I
I
don't
mean, I
know.
think that it's fair to say, we don't want to enrich abusers. So if there's a film coming out that will, glorify and add to the material wealth of these people, I think that's worth sort of reassessing. If it's just a matter of like we will never speak this name again, I'm not sure. I think that it's tricky too because there's kind of a stereotype floating around that women especially, but people who seem to be on the right side of this issue like are rejoicing in the sort of humiliation and the I don't know, the dismissal of these people. And I don't think anyone wants to see someone's livelihood destroyed. Like, it's not, we aren't like dancing on graves here, but I
Well,
think that it's,
there is a Schadenfreude aspect to some of this. Like there are plenty of people who didn't know that Matt Lauer was a alleged sexual harasser, but who celebrated him having his career ended because he like pushed Ann Curry out of her job and was kind of seen to be an asshole.
hmm,
And I think I saw one reaction when just once it started and like Leon Wieseltier was taken down. Someone on Twitter said like all these people who are getting taken down, Mark Halperin, are like everyone kind of knew they were assholes anyway.
hmm.
And I think that's you know that gets you in trouble too because it's a way of kind of saying like, oh, our side is good, and it's just
Yeah.
the people who are jerks are the real bad ones. But then you have a figure like Al Franken getting shown out, who was celebrated on the celebrated among liberals, and he turned out to be an abuser as well.
Yeah. Oh gosh, sorry. I'm getting a call that I'm sending to voicemail. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that if it's true that people are just kind of like glorying in the fall of their rivals, of course, that's like not an attractive position to be in. I haven't seen personally a whole lot of evidence of that, but maybe I'm just not looking in the right corners of Twitter.
Yeah, maybe you don't spend enough time on Twitter where, declaring that your tribal enemy is an asshole is like one of the main purposes of it.
Very true.
Who do you think has given, among this cast of rogues, who has given the best apology, do you think?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think Billy Bush's op-ed was really great. And again, he had less to apologize for, so maybe that's a rigged answer. And I thought that when I first read Louis C.K.'s, before I started thinking about the man that it was coming from, I thought that it was also very kind of soul-searching and effective. Let's see. Mark Halperin's was fine. It sort of dwelled a little bit too much on how far he had come. But I thought that it was attuned to the suffering of the victims and, remorseful. So, yeah, I don't think that, I mean, with the exception of Harvey Weinstein, whose apology was laughable, as you pointed out, I don't think that the apologies themselves have been bad. It's just been sort of distasteful to watch men immediately try to save themselves as opposed to kind of just lingering in this space of like, wow, this is bad. I'm not going to try to win people back over.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we've reached the backlash stage of the Weinstein sexual harassment story? There was a piece that Claire Berlinski wrote a couple days ago about, it was called, I think, the Warlock Hunt, and made an interesting argument that this is kind of going too far, and things that no one thought were sexual harassment 20 years ago are now being dredged up by women to say Me Too. Do you think?
I haven't seen, but see, I've seen a lot of hand-wringing about the prospect of a backlash, but I haven't actually seen anyone lose their job because of some consensual office place encounter back in the 70s or 80s, I think that if that happens, that would be bad, and we would have to address that. And that's a specter that's kind of floating over the conversation right now. But, I haven't seen it materialize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's shocking about this is it almost always seems to be a habitual occurrence, and there's almost always multiple accusers and a kind of similarity in the accusations. The one that maybe I'm a little not, I don't know if ambivalent is the right word, but the one that maybe I'm questioning a little is his name was one out of my head, the Prairie Home Companion guy.
Garrison Keillor.
Yeah, Garrison Keillor. It seems like there's maybe just one accuser there, and he's contesting it, saying he was consoling her and accidentally put his hand up the back of her shirt.
He accidentally put his hand up the back of her shirt?
That's what he claims.
I've never done that, have you? Accidentally?
I was thinking the other day, I was talking to my wife, I said, I've never hugged anyone or put my arms around anyone in an office setting in my life.
Yeah.
Which is,
I mean,
a good way to go, I think.
Certainly, I think that we need to be nuanced interpreters of information, and certainly it's fair to draw a line, saying it's not as bad to put your hand on someone's bare back as it is to force them to have sex with you. But it's still a violation, I think, and worth thinking about.
Yeah. I think those are all the questions I have. Is there anything else you want to say about apologies and the post-Weinstein moment?
I would just like to cheerfully and fervently urge all of you to get out there, have a great weekend, and not harass anybody.
Right back at you. Have a fun and harassment-free weekend. All of our viewers please enjoy yourselves and don't harass anyone while you're doing it. Katie, thanks so much for coming back on. I think you're officially a friend of the program now.
I'm so honored.
So thanks a lot, and we'll link to all those pieces that we referenced below. And people can subscribe to this show on iTunes, or they can watch on YouTube. There's lots of different ways you can get this program. So thanks again.
Thanks. All right. See ya.